Hey everybody, welcome to the Basics of Digital Painting. I'm Pete Moorbacher. You know what it is. I didn't get the screen share going. I just said I was going to, and I didn't. So the way this works is that every week I give out a assignment, and then we review over the prior week's assignment. Last week I wasn't here. I had computer problems. The fan on my CPU done broke, and I was waiting on a replacement part that was arriving the day of the class. So thankfully it all worked out. But it meant that I had to cancel last week, so we're going to go over last week's assignment from 2 weeks ago. And we're seeing not as many people in the class this time, so let's see. Where's the roles? Oh, there it is. So yeah, I've got some stuff to look over. The way this works is that if you see your thing come up on the screen, you can go ahead and raise your hand. I'll bring you up on stage. We can chit chat about your art. Before we get going, though, I'm gonna go ahead and drop the assignment for this coming week. I've got this beautiful bust here. Let me bring this up on screen, and then I'm gonna drop this in the homework channel too. So the thinking behind this is that it's just got such beautiful subtlety in the values. There's a lot of illumination inside the shadows. There's subsurface scattering. There is a lot of variation throughout all of the different edges across the face of this stylized marble bust. And so without any kind of color to worry about, there's a lot of assignments I've given that's like, do this, but do this with the color. This is like no color, but it's not even just black and white. It sort of confronts us with some of the basics of rendering and value control in a way that I find to be very compelling. This kind of organic rendering is my absolute favorite stuff to do. And so I'm hoping that you have fun doing a study of this piece too. If you have any questions about the assignment, feel free to drop them in the chat, or if you come up on stage at some point, feel free to ask them too. Anyways, we're going to jump into it. First out of the gate, we have Jade Tudor, who I don't see here. So I'm just going to go over Jade's stuff really quick, really quick, because the main thing I was looking for here was some conversation. Jade says, was a fun exercise. The skirt was the most difficult part for me, but for once I forced myself to zoom in more. Love how everyone managed to render it like something really light. Yeah, I was really impressed with everyone's work this week. Everyone had really strong control over... Did this come in at the wrong size? No. Everyone had really strong control over the values. Or not the values, the overall proportions. Like I felt like the look of the figure was so consistent this week. And the colors and like the values were all super consistent across everyone this week. It's like there was something about this reference that even though there was a lot of struggling with details and textures and rendering, that the broad strokes of it came together. And I wonder if part of that is the fact that we have this really extreme perspective that gives us it's easier to see this as a collection of shapes and not so much as specific realistic anatomy. And so it was easier for people to abstract it. If anybody has any thoughts on that when you come up on stage, feel free to let me know. Jade, I'm very proud of you that you zoomed in and did more details. I thought the work here on the skirt came out really beautifully. I love the way that you have some of these brush strokes so defined and yet overlapping in these subtle ways. Like we can see these long strokes sort of forming the flow of the skirt, the pleating of the skirt, and yet it's like intersected with the shadows here, and they carry across, and it just looks so simple and elegant, and it came together quite nicely. I love seeing these kinds of J.C. Leyendecker style parallel strokes like this. It shows a lot of intention. It's an interesting kind of stylization. I think it's very cool. I am noticing that you're getting some weird aliasing here. I wonder if this is something to do with the way that you're doing selections. If you're working at a low resolution, like if you're working close to web resolution, like if this was the actual size of the document you're working on, let's see what size this is. This is about 1200 by 1200. I would work at least double that. And if you're getting these kinds of like aliased selections here, the stair stepping, this might be something like, I've got something in my settings I need to disable. Like if you, whatever program you're using, if you take away the aliasing, like I turned off anti-aliasing on my selection here, and you can see the difference is really pronounced at this resolution. So the stair stepping might be an indication that you were using the lasso tool, but you were using it with like peculiar settings. Either that, or maybe you were using an eraser that was set to like pencil mode. Pencil mode will also create a kind of stair step, I think, if it's at 100%. So you can see we can get a kind of stair step pattern here by changing from brush mode to pencil mode with the eraser. So something was happening there. That's kind of peculiar because I don't see it everywhere. Something to keep an eye out for. I really like a lot of the brushwork that you're doing here. I think it came out really gorgeous. If there was something, I was really hoping that you would be here to talk to, because if there was something that you were struggling with, I would really like to talk to you about it. But yeah, because you had brought up that the skirt was difficult, I wanted to hear about what was difficult about it, because it's really just, it's not so much about there being an absolute right or wrong way to do this. I really want to talk to you guys about where you're having an easy time, where you're having a hard time, because I think we're all going to be struggling in different places. All right. Thanks so much for doing the work. I hope to see you around in the future. Next up, we got Amanda. Amanda, you're usually here. It's easy to bring Amanda up because Amanda's comfortable talking and always here. Hey, Amanda.
Hey.
How's it going?
Good. How about you?
Pretty good. Other than freaking out. All right. So, I'm sure you know all about it because Scott and I have been talking back and forth about this for a long time. Yeah. Tell me about your experience with the work this week.
It was fun. That was the goal for me. It's like, let's just have fun and try to play a little bit with colors. I didn't deviate too much, but I kind of got this. It looks like it's green in there, but it's actually like this weird, like dark gold.
I was going to ask about that. And one of the things I was going to do right now is sample some of this and see what color is that. It is definitely a dark gold. You're right. But it looks green. It's right up next to a lot of these orange colors. Like when you get this, I mean, let me pull this. It's a little further towards red. It's definitely further towards red, and it's way more saturated. And when the two colors get next to each other, it makes this gold definitely look like it's got a green tinge to it.
Yeah, I knew I wanted it, but I didn't know what color it was on the wheel, so I did what you were suggesting, and like, okay, let's throw this color down and play with like the brightness and the hue and the saturation until I get what I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And I got it.
Okay. I thought it looked a little odd.
I
love gray, introducing gray in paintings, because when you have there's some set, like, I'm not sure, I think the touch settings got turned on. One second here. Wacom is messing with me. I keep having stuff trigger by accident. Into a touch. Oh my God. Touch input off, please. Thank you. There we go. Oh, keeps. Okay. So we have like a really bright color here, and we just pick like really neutral gray. The gray, you could see next to the yellow and the orange here, the gray takes on this like really cool tone compared to that more desaturated yellow color. It comes off as like bluish, while this, I think yours comes off as a little bit greenish. Mm-hmm. It's the green, and I think the reason the greenish look throws me off is because I'm not expecting anything to be greenish. It's all kind of near in the hue part of the ring. So it's not like, it doesn't feel out of place from just looking at the colors, but then looking at them in context, it struck me as maybe being an artifact of like gradient map or some sort of color adjustment, because I'm seeing it sandwiched here between this very rich brown color and this bright orange. And
Mhm.
then we have this stripe through the middle that's coming through that is pushing further up this way and also down this way. What? So tell me about it.
I think I'm a fan of like Renaissance styled art. So a lot of times when I was doing some studies, I would notice they would have this really like rich maple color. They would have a whitish skin tone, and then in between sometimes they'd have this weird like greenish or like
Huh.
yellowy color. And I always thought it looked really interesting, so I tried it with this.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know. It struck me in a weird way, but it's not necessarily wrong. What else? Anything else that from your experience this week?
Oh, the face was definitely tough to do. I think it was just the position of it, where it is, or it's like, okay, this is going to be a bit abstract because I can't quite make out what's going on.
Yeah, it is tough to make out what's going on in this face. As much as this whole thing feels very clean and graphic, the face is the face and hair have gotten kind of cooked by like over sharpening and adjustment that's
Mhm.
happened on this piece. Like whatever processing has been done on it has started to cook the features, because we've got these like weird blown out areas that don't seem like they make a ton of sense. It almost looks kind of like what happens with like an AI generated image. But I think this is a photo that has gone through a series of processes. Like there's this orange that's kind of leaking out here. Seems like maybe it was a bad matte. Like maybe this was originally against a red matte based off of
Oh.
like the color around the hair here. And then, maybe it was cut out weird because like the clip, the silhouette of the figure on the reference is actually kind of blurry compared to some of the details on the interior. So I wonder if it was maybe cut out using like maybe they like did a color selection and then softened it a little bit and then cut it out like that. And so we have these weird artifacts that make it a little difficult. So I think it requires a little bit of artistry and interpretation to get it back to how it looks, because zooming in on it doesn't seem to be very effective. Trying to reproduce these patterns perfectly zoomed in will produce probably pretty weird results. Um, I think if you were going to improve anything about the face, um, I've got a couple of things. One of them is like the eye. I think it is a there. I think there is a way of suggesting the eye in the face a little bit more than what you have here. Um, I'm like squinting and turning my head and trying to blur because like a distance. This definitely feels legible. Like we can really see the face in here. We see that like she's looking over her shoulder. We see the eyes, nose, and mouth. It feels like it's all anatomically correct. But then when you like zoom in and look at it carefully, it looks like an alien. There's like um the ridge on the like the nose ridge and like where the forehead is definitely not right up here. The hair, because we have the hair covering it, and the highlights and shadows of the hair are disrupting the overall shape of the head. And I think that perhaps you needed um, a little bit more of like the way the hair is coming forward here.
Like the bang or whatever.
Yeah, because she's got it kind of like some strands that are kind of rolling back this way, and I think that there's got to be some sort of gradient here that's not being fully captured by the reference. Like maybe we're seeing a little bit more shadow on the front of the face and a little bit more highlight on the side. So maybe pushing that a little bit. We have this shiny highlight along the nose, but there's got to be an edge to it somewhere. And then the eye, if you want to get a little bit of if you don't want to be pushing your values too hard, I would just be selecting something like this really bright blue that you have here to be able to get the pit of that shadow. I think that this color is perfectly usable for creating a little bit of color contrast along with the deeper value in order to create additional contrast if you need it. And then like I would take that out a little bit on the nose because I think that the shadow that we're getting under the nose is so dark in part due to that over sharpening. Because like what we're seeing here with this like blown out highlight on there was clearly an edge here, and there was clearly an edge here, and then as it's sharpening, it's trying to darken one side and lighten the other in order to define that edge through the sharpen filter. Because as we like intensify that, I mean, you can see how it's like deepening that separation there in an effort to try to like, as the sharpen goes up, it just blows that like nose side plane out even more. And so I think what we need is probably to do the opposite a little bit in order to get it to feel more natural. So I think there's probably some shadow coming down there, and I think we probably can safely use some of the skin tone, and then in the opposite direction, probably like lighten the underside of that nose a little bit. And the more you like work backwards away from like these hyper contrasty over sharpened edges, you might start to like find the features of the face again.
Looking a little less alien.
Yeah. It's not your fault. I mean, it's really, this reference is pretty cooked in the face. I've seen some people really struggling with the hair because, again, the hair is another place where that over sharpened look is creating this kind of pile of spaghetti look. If we had
ramen noodles.
Yeah, if we had just taken this in isolation, this doesn't look like anything. This looks so gross. It looks like a pile of like ground beef more than hair. It's really gross looking. And so trying to study that, it's like replicating the study as given is maybe not the most ideal result. But what did you write in your comment? Oh, the calf close to the camera was challenging. What was challenging about the calf close to the camera?
I think it was that the deep line where the calf muscle is. Trying to get that and make it not too hard, not too soft, and finding that balance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you do like your chunky brushes quite a bit.
Yeah, I do.
And that's one of the ways that's one of the points where I personally have a bias. You know, my bias is I have a bias towards, round brushes, in part because it provides a lot of control for carving sharp edges as well as doing softer stuff. And this kind of organic shading, I mean, this is where the assignment for next week with the marble bust, you're going to be running into the exact same issue again. So it's going to be an interesting playground to try to deal with these challenges, because figuring out how to get some of the edges to kind of subtly tighten in and then loosen up. It's easy to kind of like I think overdo it and like get too intensely focused on this. I mean, that's something I'm always guilty of. But the reverse is also not a virtue. Like keeping it too loose, keeping it too chunky, letting the custom brush go too out of control on this can really cause a lot of difficulty. Because it's when you have a nice clear definition of all of these edges, transitions, then you can spend a little time on it and kind of go nuts, like developing the rendering. And just the more you can bring in control in an area that has a lot of definition and subtlety like that, I mean, the more swag the whole thing looks. It's people love that aesthetic of getting to see it. Lots of control on display inside the brushwork. Though, I mean, there's also probably a way of making it look like even if you had only done it with like 3 brushstrokes, like perfectly controlled, messy brushstrokes is also totally a look. Is not exactly a right way or a wrong way to do that, but I think that space in between it can be a little messy. Like I really like the splattery look that you have for this specular highlight across the shoe. I think that
Mm.
looks really cool. The way that it's all broken up and jagged and has this energy to it. But the problem I'm seeing here and with some of the other submissions today is what we don't want is things to look like kind of splotchy or spotty. If you can get a natural looking brushstroke to look like it has clear direction and intensity and specificity, even if it's rough looking, it's still going to be very aesthetic. And if you're going to render the living hell out of it and control every little transition perfectly, it's going to look very aesthetic. But it's like there's this nebulous space in between that I think we're trying to avoid wherever possible. And so yeah, that's figuring out the right like direction for you is really the question here, because if you keep leaning towards wanting to do more energetic brushstrokes, then I'm not going to just like ask you to go and render the living hell out of this stuff. But I think it also is nice to see a contrast between areas of high rendering and areas of like energetic, simple brushstrokes. So if you can have both of them in a painting together, I think it could be very cool. So, maybe next week, give it a try to see like how tight and controlled you can make it, like how much you can lock it down and have total control over it. And that way, like you have that in your back pocket in case you ever want to use that for one of your paintings. And then, use other opportunities to figure out how to get this like looser, more energetic, more brushy look. And that way you'll have the ability to do one or the other depending on what your artistic needs call for.
Yeah, I got some ideas for the bust for next week.
Okay, great.
Trying that.
Awesome. Any questions? Anything you want to talk about?
No, that was great.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thanks, Amanda. All right. Yulia. Is Yulia here? Yulia's here. Yulia, you want to come on stage? You got a mic? Oh, Jade's here. Jade, I missed you. I should have put you on the back burner. Dang. Yulia, you want to raise your hand? I just noticed Scott's emoji mentioned Kickstarter prep. I remember, oh my God. Like I've had some like insane Kickstarter experiences over the years. Just some of the most stressful moments of my life. I can't believe I'm like back in it again, starting tomorrow, launching tomorrow. Oh, I'm going to be promoting a bunch of stuff on here today also. I just opened up mentorships again. I can invite you on stage also, invite to speak. I'm starting, I had somebody request mentorships. I'll do this at the end. Mentorships, you say, yes. Over at huckleberry.art. But I'll get back to it. Yulia, hi.
Yeah, hi.
You were saying that you were using brushes in CSP and getting used to it. Are you just jumping into CSP also?
Yes, it was my first time with CSP.
Okay, great. So yeah, I just got started trying to use it also, and I was curious about your experience. What were you using before CSP? We're talking about Clip Studio.
I use different. I use my tablet, so I juggle between different apps to try what would work for me.
Mhm.
So when I finally tried CSP, it was close to Photoshop. It was easier to use the round brushes, the same as in Photoshop. So I like it. It was interesting and hard at first experience with the settings. They work a little different. You need to do every brush separate, and I couldn't find opacity. I wanted to try round brush. Like you said about round brush with opacity and flow, and I really wanted to try it in digital, and it was a struggle to find it first, but when I found it, it was great.
Yeah, there's like there's like all these. It's not all in the same panel like in Photoshop. There's like within the window. There's like tool properties and sub tool properties, sub brush. So I have these brush subtools, and then I imported my my default brush set from Photoshop into CSP, and it pretty much works exactly like my old one. I think it does. It's not at the moment. I don't know what's going on. Oh, there we go. Yeah. Oh, that's like the opacity isn't showing up on here. The opacity is controllable through. I found that CSP allows you to map the hotkeys, the number keys, to control the opacity the same way as in Photoshop, which is something that Critic cannot do by default. So, I'm able to like hit 7 for 70%, 0 for 100%, and I was able to like reproduce that. So, because I don't like jumping over to like a side panel to control brush properties, I have like a muscle memory for it from years of using Photoshop. And so I found that I was able to like reproduce basically the same exact brush effects by importing the my simple brush set from Photoshop, and then I remapped a few hotkeys. Every time I hit a hotkey and it doesn't do what I want, I jump up into the shortcut settings. Popped up on the wrong window over here, and I remap it. And over the course of doing a single painting, I found my way to remapping everything that was different from where I was expecting it to be. And it was very cooperative with me on like getting it set up. And very quickly, I forgot I was working in CSP because it does same blending modes that behave the same way. It has, what do you call them? It's got they have got correction layers, which are basically the same as adjustment layers. And it's got gradient maps in here, which are the interface for it is a little different, but I was able to bring in all of my gradient maps, and I'm able to like move the handles around on the gradient maps the same way as I do in Photoshop. And so it's very similar to being able to replicate the exact same process from Photoshop using Clip Studio Paint, which I found was nice.
I'm glad there is gradient maps. I wanted to try them maybe next time. And I used the same brush pack as you from Huckleberry Academy. And I really liked it. I wanted to use the sponge one, but challenged myself to use just one round brush.
I mean, just one round brush is always nice. I like using the sponge brush at times earlier on in the process. The Inky and the sponge brush are there to try to prevent too much control from entering into the process too early. I find that if I can keep things looser and less controlled early, then I get less precious about it, and I don't presume it's correct quite so early. It leaves me room to make corrections as I tighten things down and progress through the painting. So that's why I have those. They're less about applying texture to finish things, and I do that a little bit sometimes, but they're more about preventing me from feeling like I'm at the end of the painting when I'm at the beginning. So where do you have an easy time? Where do you have a hard time with this assignment this week?
When I get settled with the settings, it was fun. I wanted to make this smooth shading with the legs, and I like to do skirt. I decided that I focus a little bit on details, and hair. This was a mess. I'm not sure I did a good job with it.
Yeah, the same trouble that we were just talking about with Amanda. It's like the original reference on here, the skirt is very clear. It's very sharp and very clear, and there's a lot of room to interpret it. And I think everyone kind of interpreted it in their own way, but everyone had this everyone got a very nice look out of it. And then the hair is just like challenging you to make something up because it looks so awful on its own.
Yeah, I decided it was out of focus for a reason. Like maybe just focus on the closer, the details that are close, and it was a blur. So I went that way to make it like a little bit out of focus, maybe.
That's a good idea. One of the things and like as I was saying, I think the way they cut out the matte on this, the way they cut out the background, they did it in a way that left a blurry edge. And I noticed that you replicated that a little bit by just keeping your paintbrush just like a little loose, paintbrush strokes a little loose here. It's easy to just sort of let the paintbrush create a loose edge if you just like wiggle it a little bit. But I don't know, like I think if you wanted to, you probably could have picked some of these spots to, because we have like a really distinct motion to all this, there's this like forward striking motion. I think that finding areas that run a little bit more parallel to the motion, you could keep a little bit firmer. And then ones that run a little bit more perpendicular to it, keep them a little looser, and get a pattern that goes back and forth between hard and loose edges. And you can keep the loose ones really loose. And I think that pattern back and forth is going to create a nice aesthetic look.
Yeah, I like the suggestion.
This is something that they call in painting lost and found edges, and it's something I love doing. Whenever I'm working with the silhouette of the figure, rather than keeping it really tight all around, I find that there's a lot of room to define like the motion of it and a kind of rhythm to it by picking some areas and having them go tighter and others looser. And if you do that across the silhouette, I think it creates a very aesthetic look. But it also defines, the surfaces a little bit here. Like we have these clothing folds, and you can see how as we have like planes that would go this way, keeping them soft and then the planes that go this way, keeping them hard, we end up with something that feels actually kind of natural, even if it's not specific, doesn't really specifically look like that in reality. And it can give you the ability to like kind of create streaks or, this sense of motion, this sense of being out of focus, but in a way that's a little bit more balanced than just keeping it all blurry. And I think you're achieving that a little bit here on the skirt, where you have some of these edges being very, some of them very tight and defined, while you have some of them here on the edges sort of blurring out and giving it a little bit of additional motion. Don't be scared of like kind of going overboard with it. If you want to like blur something out to give it a sense of motion or just to like break up the silhouette, go crazy with it. See how far you can push it before it starts looking screwed up. Because especially if you're doing it on a separate layer, and when I start to do something like this, I will typically do on a separate layer. You can just go as nuts as you want with it and then decide that you really don't like it and start to pare it back and you don't have to worry. Intentionally like losing some of those edges and intentionally like making something blurry. That's always a strong choice. And so but like it can be intimidating to make that choice on the same layer that you're trying to do all of your precise work on. So just make a new layer, go crazy with it, and then see what kind of like fun results you get. And you don't need to worry about, and then if you don't, flip it on and off so that you can see whether or not it's actually an improvement. Keep the parts you like, ditch the parts you don't, and you're good to go. Should be really fast to just be experimental with it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think I should do this.
Okay, great. Any questions for me?
I had a questions about CSP.
Sure.
Maybe you can recommend me what settings for brushes, like you open in your menu, or maybe something specific you do from your experience with Photoshop in the CSP that could help.
mean, the way I lay out my workspace is pretty simple, where I have the navigator and then the layers, and then I usually had the tool presets down here from Photoshop, which is a feature they don't even really highlight anymore. And so I just have the subtool brush down here with my brush pack so that all the brushes are available to me all the time from there. I prefer it rather than having the context menu. Like in Photoshop, if you right click, you get a context menu with all the brushes. And I always found this is like difficult for me to navigate. So I like having like a list of them over here, and I was able to like get that set up in CSP, though I'm struggling right now trying to figure out there it is. Okay. Yeah, I guess so I have all of them, all of the core brushes up there. And so I just leave them up there, and I just kind of always reach for them down there. But wherever you like finding them, I'm pretty sure that you can map that in the shortcut settings. There's I think CSP is even more customizable than Photoshop because there's also these modifier key settings. I haven't dug into this too much, but you can have some of the modifier keys do all sorts of weird stuff as well. There's a lot in here. I don't know. I think the main problem is figuring out what you want. Like, how do you feel comfortable? What do you keep reaching for when you're not thinking about it? And then making sure that your workspace is set up so that whatever you meant to do when you weren't thinking, that's where you put the hotkeys. That's where you put the panels. And, figuring out what your brain is wanting without you thinking about what you want. If you can start to puzzle that out, then you can start to put everything where it needs to be.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. My pleasure. Okay. So we're moving on to Nanoboy. Is Nanoboy here? Nanoboy's not here. I'm just going to like set Nanoboy's thing aside because I already made this mistake once. Abarth's here. Abarth was saying, color balance adjustment layer really helped me get the background color we wanted, but I'm still not completely satisfied with the coloring on the dress or the shirt. Both seem dingy to me somehow compared to the reference. Tried using hard and soft light to brighten them up. Just make them they just feel washed out. Hey, how's it going?
Hey, Pete. Pretty good. Yeah, I feel like this is the same thing I keep struggling with in all these pieces, getting the color where I want it.
I just wanted to like go over some additional complicated color tools. Like, not that you need additional complications, but there's a lot of ways to adjust color, not just like glaze it in, paint it in manually. And I wanted to go over some of those because, I mean, over the years, whenever I get a sense of my whole painting feels a little too much like this, or it feels a little too much like this, rather than trying to solve 5 different color problems, I'm reaching for tools where I'm trying to solve all the colors simultaneously. Like, if we wanted, I mean, dingy is a subjective word for it, but I think more objectively, I think you're very desaturated. Other than you got the background color pretty close, so we can maybe mask this out a little bit. I'm going to end up with the same problem they did when they cut out this figure in the first place.
I had a mask for the background when I was painting it, and it was really convenient, but then I ended up with this sort of funny highlight around the whole figure because of it.
Tell me more about that. What did you have set up? Was it like the background painted over the top, or?
No, I had a whole layer actually that just had painted in where the background was, and then I use that to like I think you can right click on a layer and say make selection from it.
Yes.
And then I use that.
Same is true of masks. If you control click on a mask, it'll also make a selection from it, like in this.
Yeah, so that's what I used that originally to put in the yellow for the background, and then use the color balance to adjust it to be where I wanted it. But then I used it a bunch, for example, when I was painting in some of the stuff on the dress or on the shirt, so I wouldn't smear over the background.
Okay.
It it was convenient, but then I've like in the end, I would got this sort of you can see like on the top of the lake, for example, you can see there's this funny glow around the whole thing where
Yeah.
the didn't quite so it's like all the other edges I was painting in didn't line up with the edges from before, and so whenever they mismatched, you got this funny effect.
Yes. It could be a bug, could be a feature. This happens in traditional painting when somebody does like a really strong underpainting. Like sometimes oil painters will work with a really bright underpainting to create a vibrancy as like light passes through the top layers of the painting. There's a certain amount of subsurface scattering that happens physically in the paint when light shines on it. And so having a bright underpainting will do this. But then you can also like not quite paint to the edges and you leave this little bit of flashing at the edge that creates this like colored highlight. And it's kind of a mood. Like I kind of like the way that it looks, to be honest. It shows a hand-touched feel to it because it's not like a clean, sharp edge. It's not like two masks didn't quite align. It looks like you were precisely painting, a color over another color and you didn't want to overpaint it. And so you underpainted it just a little bit and it left a bit of an edge. I don't know. I don't hate the way it looks. I think it's kind of cool, actually.
Okay, yeah, it feels like because when I paint in the brushstrokes for the values, then I come back and do the colors, and I'm painting brushstrokes again in the same area. And it seems like I mean, obviously you can never replicate exactly the same brushstrokes as you did the first time, and so they like where I put the color doesn't line up with where I put the values. It feels untidy somehow.
I keep it messy. My trick is that I keep it so messy that it's not contained to something that's as fine as an edge like this, that it goes way overboard, and then I'm forced to manually clean it up and go in with a layer on top. And when I'm doing details, and if I really want to have like a nice clean moment where the two meet, on a layer above everything else, I go in and I just manually paint it. And I like carve in that edge and make sure that that's being done as its own precise little end step. And you can see it just takes a couple of seconds here and there. You pick it some places where you want to do it. You have some places where you leave it alone. And then, you end up with some edges that are harder or some edges that are softer. And it ends up becoming a feature due to the fact that it's like, it's being done with intention. It's being done with purpose. So rather than trying to fix the way that those two things meet, I think like you either have a choice of like kind of continuing to do things the way they are because it leaves an interesting artifact, or maybe you like decide to just be even less precise about it and not try to worry about cleaning that up, so that like at a later step when you're focusing on details, you can go and make distinct decisions about where you want to keep that sort of thing, what places you want to bust it up. But so thinking about broader color adjustments, it sounds like you have been doing this sort of thing already, where you have like a selection of the background. We've got one here. You can sometimes when I'm working, I will do a layer that is just an element that I know I'm going to want to hit multiple times, and I'll just leave it as an invisible layer like this so that I can control click that layer to summon that selection. The same can be done. I had a teacher back in college that would create channels. You can create additional alpha channels in the channels tab in Photoshop, and then use them to save selections because it doesn't show up as part of the image, but you can go and basically use that as like a repository of channels of like pre-made selections. So if you have something like this, you can then go and, select it, create an adjustment layer, and then do whatever you need to create either minor or major adjustments, hue, saturation, values, whatever you need. And in this case, I selected the interior of the figure because you were saying it felt a little dingy. I think it just looks desaturated. It looks grayed out as a matter of like not bringing in enough saturation through those hard light layers. And if it if it's not quite if you feel like they're relatively correct, but not like collectively achieving the result you're looking for, this is where an adjustment layer can come in and just make a huge difference. You can, in this case, just bringing up the saturation, I think makes a big difference in getting it closer. If you wanted to adjust your values a little bit by doing a little bit of a levels adjustment, you can bring up the contrast on it if it felt like that was an issue. Can maybe even isolate key areas like the skirt if you want to just adjust that a little bit. And then I also really like, I'm going to hide these, selective color. When I don't want to just be always adding saturation, like with a gradient map, selective color is one of my favorite ways of broadly adjusting color in Photoshop. I think it might be a Photoshop exclusive tool. I'm not sure it's in something like CSP. You can see you pick like a color region, like in this case, I'm picking the whites, so just the highlights, and I can do like, tons of magenta, no magenta. Lots of cyan, no cyan. In some cases, it's giving these like very minor differences to like the way that the light kind of casts just on a highlight. You could see, oh, look, in this case, it looks like the yellow is reflecting on the skirt while we're getting a kind of inverse color contrast by turning the yellow all the way down inside the skirt. And then you can like lighten and darken it. So these kind of broad adjustments can sometimes be really strong. And then sometimes you have like a specific area, like in this case, the shirt is the only blue thing. So we're able to adjust the color on the shirt in isolation a little bit by selecting the blue channel here. And if you can break it, and if you can move the sliders in a way that causes it to look really screwed up, then it's a good, strong tool. That's my thinking. It's like if you can make it look screwed up by moving the sliders around, then you're working with the right tools. So there's a lot of screwed up, bad, washed out, grungy possibilities here, which means that there's definitely ways of making this thing look exactly how you want. Because if you can make it look like this, you can make it look good too. And because it's kind of flexible to just kind of like slide things around and see how they look, it means that you're going to get to respond to it in your own personal way and look at it and say like, okay, it's too dingy. Okay, now it's too radioactive. Like, what looks good to me? What do I want out of this? And you can see as I'm pushing sliders to extremes, we're ending up in like completely crazy territory. But this is a favorite of mine. And then of course the last one, it's like old mainstay. Gradient map is nice for bringing in some additional. It only really has the ability to add, if you have a gradient map with like soft light or hard light, it only has the ability to add color. It twists the values and it adds color, but it never really subtracts color. It's always going to make things more colorful, more saturated as you layer these in. So if you end up with a composition that's feeling like the colors are kind of getting away from you and getting into strange territory, there may not be a solution here. But if it's feeling a little desaturated still and you want to find a direction to kind of push it forwards, there might be something in here, especially if you're using it kind of half strength, that will push it more in the direction that you're looking for.
I think my reaction was that I wanted it to be brighter, but I see that you're reaching for saturation as the tool to change the grayness of it, which I guess makes sense.
Yeah, I mean the really short version is that I just turn the saturation slider up. It's like it doesn't work for everything in here, but because it's on a mask, like one of the things that I will do sometimes with a adjustment layer like this is I will do intentionally too much, like this, and I'll fill the whole thing with black. We have the whole mask for the hue saturation is black, and then I'll take a brush set to white, and then you can brush in just the areas you want and manually kind of place that saturation and push it back and forth by painting on the mask manually. And that way you can kind of build it up. And I don't know, I think there's something about doing things by hand that keep them from getting out of control, because you'll make a mark and go, that's not it, that's too much. You can back off. And you can kind of tiptoe your way forwards a little bit that way. That might help.
I've been doing a lot of painting in the masks for the gradient maps, but I haven't tried it for the these like adjustment layers. Yeah, I give that a try.
Yeah, the same thing is true of like levels. If you wanted to like, really brighten something, like overly brighten it, and then we blacken out that mask, and then you can kind of manually paint in bits of light and manually paint in bits of exposure using the adjustment by painting in the mask on the adjustment layer. Part of what I love about digital art is that it has all kinds of weird things that don't have analogs in traditional media. Like, I'm not sure that there is an analog to doing this in any kind of traditional media. Like, you can glaze pigment over other pigment in ways that like it's hard for digital to reproduce, but you can't just like paint light on top of something to like make it feel like it's being more illuminated or more saturated. Like, that's something that's expressly the domain of digital, which is part of the thing I like about it. I like the feel of digital. Any questions? Thoughts?
Yeah, and it makes sense that like every time you're doing this, of course, you're adding more of these funny edges. But I guess then after you do all this, then you come in with a layer and go clean up the edges and just like on top is what you were saying before.
Yeah, I'm messing with it. I'm trying to look at it broadly. I'm trying to squint at it and figure out like what are these problems in the most broad possible sense. And then at some point, if I feel like that's all kind of coming together, then I just make a layer on top of it and I go and clean up all the weird, mistakes that have been introduced. And I find it's pretty easy to just go and pick out all of the little bits that aren't working after, making a bit of a mess. That's like, it's been my way of working for a long time. And it's so far just continued to work. And so I'm continuing to do things that way. I'm not certain it's quite as productive in other mediums, but for working digitally, I don't know, it's kind of good. And then I got this selective color here that's like really screwed up. But, because it's like producing such surreal results, you definitely would you can kind of step into that halfway as well. If you ever wanted to introduce a peculiar color, but you don't want it to just be like, this is like it's not just one color, it's like a kind of different lens that we're seeing this through. You could kind of introduce that piecemeal over parts of it. There's so many options, it's kind of dizzying. Like every week that you come by and you're having a little bit of a problem with stuff, I'm like excited to introduce more complications to make this process more confusing.
I mean, it's fun to play with all these tools, so I'm enjoying it. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, Photoshop is not something that like it's best to learn all the tools and then try to make art. I think all of the many tools of Photoshop are fun and useful once they're layered on top of a basic understanding of how you want to make an image, because they all serve some potential workflow. They're not like an absolute solution to like a fundamental problem. They're just some dumb bullshit that maybe makes sense to you in the moment. And like there's 1,000 little possible paths to be able to explore down. And, knowing that you have those options is powerful, but like learning all of it in a vacuum is useless. So I'm hoping that the more of these you get exposed to as you actually like go through making these, that they'll at some point in the future, you'll be like, you know what? I'm going to try some stuff. I'm going to go and mess around with this a little bit. Because it's through that kind of wild experimentation, I think all the really creative, fun stuff comes up. All right. Any final questions before I let you go? Move on.
No, thank you so much, Pete.
All right. Thank you. All right. I've been slow as shit today. My brain is only at half speed. Nanoboy, I'm so sorry. We need to move on. You did, let's see, learning from the mistake of ignoring perspective in the last study. Nanoboy included this grid, which I thought was an excellent insight. You can see how once you get like this sketch, the early parts of the painting process, whether you're using a sketch or blobs of color or whatever, they any kind of construction lines, all the preliminary work is all done for one purpose, which is context. It's so hard to figure out what you're looking at. Your brain is just not big enough to hold the whole image in your head, the whole 3D object of it, all of the colors and patterns and values and everything. And so we're making these judgments about how things should be changed in a painting as we like add little bits of changes, little nudges here or there. But to know what kind of nudges we need to make, we need to have some sort of context for making those choices. And so I think laying out a perspective grid, figuring out where the horizon line is, having that on a layer so you can just like have it semi-transparent or like there at the beginning to give yourself perspective, not like foreshortening perspective, but like context perspective of where things are, what they're supposed to be doing. The more of that you can get at the earlier stages of the process, the easier the whole freaking thing becomes. And I think this is a great illustration of that. Like just laying down some grids, laying down this. Oh, Nanoboy was doing things in a way that I think is the way I end up doing grids. I can demonstrate this really quick. This is a weird little Photoshop hack. If you go down to where is it? It's, the polygon tool. There is under here, under this gear in the context menu, there's this let me show you what the polygon tool normally does. Polygon tool does this. It's like you can choose how many sides you want. I want 13-sided polygon. I want a triangle, 3 sides, right? Like that's modestly useful. Let's make a star. And it's like, okay, now it pinches in the middle. All right, why is this useful? Well, we can make up to 99 sides. And then if it's a star, we can say indent by not 0%. We want indent by 99%. We want 99 sides, 99 indentation. And what do we get? We get this shape. And this shape is a bunch of lines emanating from a central point. And so this is how I end up laying out perspective grid most of the time. Is I'll first draw in where the horizon line is going to be. And then I will take the polygon tool and I will pick where the vanishing point is going to be. And I'll do one like this. And then if you want to make a perspective grid, you just pick the other vanishing point and you do this and you end up with a perspective grid. It's a weird hack. There's better ways of doing it, and there's like built-in tools in Photoshop these days, and I think there's even better built-in tools in like some of these other programs. But I'm using like an ancient version of Photoshop, so I use this to like create lines that emanate from a single point. It looks kind of like he was doing that same trick here, because the lines are getting thinner as they get further away from the center. Yeah, 99 indents, 99 sides. 99 burgers, 99 fries, 99 milkshakes. All right. Thanks, Nanoboy. Last, we got Dr. Sensible, who I've got his speed paint here. Gabriel. Hey, how's it going, man? Pull him up on stage. Unmute. Ooh, it's coming in at 720p. There we go. I just invited Dr. Sensible on stage.
There we go.
There he is. Hey, how's it going?
Hey, Pete. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. You said in your comment today that you were doing this a little bit different than usual.
Yeah, it's been a couple weeks since I did it. I think one of the big things was I tried to put a time restriction on
Mm.
myself, get it done quickly. I think the big thing that I did differently was I just went straight into painting colors first, um, and didn't do like a grayscale value first.
For this piece, I think it's not too hard to do that.
Yeah. Just wanted to try some new stuff. Try to get a little bit more painterly, as we've talked about before.
Mhm.
And so I definitely found that doing it this way, kind of looks like a mess for a while until you get it to a certain point, but then it started coming together.
Yeah. Drawing the face in like that makes a big difference. Trying to figure out what's actually going on with that face rather than having it be blobs of color seems like the easy way to me. Because that face,
Yeah,
is a
easier.
bit of a mess.
The face was still messed up for sure.
Yeah. I'm surprised to see that you're like turning your line layer like on and off. You got these like gaps between chunks of paint, and then you're also still trying to like, but then you're trying to kind of like push them together. It looks like at some point these different chunks of color need to like merge and find edges, right?
For sure. I didn't want to get distracted by the value shift of
Uh-huh.
the lines. And to try and focus a little bit more on the blocks and pulling stuff together, like you'll see. And I found it helpful just to, kind of check in every once in a while with my lines to see where do things go, but then to go back to just, kind of treating it like I'm plopping paint right on a canvas.
Yeah, there's like, so you've got these like really, really loose areas, and then you're then going back in and trying to tighten it down with another like thicker coat that's laid in more precisely. It seems,
Yeah, a little bit.
it seems harder. Like trying to work in this way that's very like loose and transparent. Like right now, like on the face, you have this like little island of skin tone, little island of like hair color, and there's
Mhm.
like gaps between them. This is what you've done throughout this. And then as you've gone to tighten it down, you've had to kind of like not only darken the colors on the interior of it to bring them up to the level of saturation you're looking for, but you also have to like define the edges where these different islands of color meet. And it seems like you're basically having to like paint through this stuff multiple times, like almost like you're building up like depth, on a painting that has like a with like a transparent medium.
Yeah, it's like I'm painting with like linseed oil thinned oils or something.
Yeah, it seems like a hard way. I mean, like because we have like digital is like it's a medium that has the ability to be like as transparent or opaque as you want at the touch of a button. It's one
Mhm.
of my favorite things about the medium of how it has this ability to be like if you're working with semi-transparent physical media, like sometimes you'll have problems where it's like, oh, it's not sticking, it's not layering over itself, it's like lifting up, or it's not sticking down, or like, these layers on top are smudging the layers below it. But with Photoshop, like you get to have it can be like infinitely thin, but also be kind of indelible. It can be fully opaque, but then can also be like erased just as quickly. It doesn't leave permanent marks if you don't want it to. And so this idea of like building it up slowly, it feels like it's not fully taking advantage of like the strength of digital paint as a medium. And it's
Yeah,
making
that's
this.
fair.
How long did this whole thing take you?
3 hours.
3 hours. Okay, that's not bad. You got a lot of work done in 3 hours. I think it comes from like your level of painting experience that you managed to get it. Basically having to paint over every section of this whole thing 3 times in 3 hours, shows that you have a lot of comfort and efficiency with the way you're making your marks. But I think that if you were to have to take fewer passes at it all, then you would, be able to do more with it in less time. And
Yeah.
I don't think you'd be making a lot of sacrifices for doing it that way. Because this like progressive buildup where you have to like fill in the gaps to like blot out the yellow underneath and like progressively build up your colors, and it's all very craftsman-like, but it's like I don't think it's like necessarily getting you like stronger results in the final image. It's cool to see, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think I definitely
Is it a byproduct of the brushes you're using? Or are you using brushes that like naturally come in kind of like washy and semi-transparent?
I think I do lack a little bit of confidence with fully hard brushes. I think like one of the skills that I'm building up, and like my two main things that I'm trying to work on right now is like value, getting better with value, but also getting better with putting in the right marks right away. And I've relied pretty heavily on kind of putting in rough marks and then zeroing in on where they're actually supposed to be by starting from like that blurry to hard. And I use essentially brush size to do a lot of that, and pressure sensitivity. And so one thing that I do want to get better at that I see a lot of people do is work with more opaque brushes and harder edges, and not have to do it as meticulously as I do to get the same result.
Yeah, but I don't think it's a matter of like knocking it in the first try. Like I've seen painters that do that, and that seems to be a very specific way of working that is like a very niche working method. My point here is like I was saying you had to go over it 3 times, but honestly, there's probably places in this painting where you had to go over 4 or 5 coats to kind of like get it built up to the place that you wanted it. And we can't just like know exactly what, it's not like we're looking for a kind of perfect pitch where we need to identify exactly what color, exactly what value, and know exactly where it's going to be and like knock it in a single brush stroke without ever having to like figure it out. Like that, there's a very small number of people that do that. And it's just because that's how they think. And they struggle to work in a way that is much more typical, which is that like you do things loose and they're vague, and then you go from vague to specific over time, which is the way it sounds like you typically work, and that's normal. My point here is that the vagueness doesn't need to be kind of translucent and washy. The vagueness can be just, using a brush that has, like you're using brushes that have some texture to them and some looser edges. And so if you can just go in a little bit heavier with that earlier, you can find ways of like refining out, like picking out edges, smoothing transitions, and like getting to where you want to go. But like you can lay down that those rough shapes, those rough values in stronger ways earlier, and then you need to like fool around with it less. Like I think it just is going to take fewer applications, fewer brush strokes to get the same results, because eventually at some point you're going to have a lot of it down. It's going to look more or less right, but you're still going to have concerns. There's going to be additional little folds you want to add, some surface texture you want to build up. You want to like differentiate some of these edges from others by making some of them harder and some of them softer. And like all of that precision work that's happening, refining at the end, you need to have a lot of the other broad strokes established already. And so turning the process of making the broad strokes into a 3 or 4 or 5 step of like slowly building up and adding extra applications, I'm just not sure that it like ends up getting you where you want to go.
Yeah, I guess maybe that comes from the way so like doing like mini painting, for example, like painting on miniatures or like with traditional materials. It's like the glazing process,
Yeah.
right? Like doing it like thin coats, that kind of vibe. But also, I think for this particular one, you and I have talked a few times now about me having a very digital footprint that works for some people, but isn't necessarily what I want. I want it to be more painterly,
Mhm.
and so I guess subconsciously in my mind, I was like, I'm gonna paint this, like, I'm gonna treat this like paint,
Mhm.
and maybe it extended my process a little bit.
But I mean, you're right. Like, I don't really feel the digitally look to this quite as much as before. So on that dimension, you're getting some good success this week. I know I'm like coming on you very critically here. I just,
No,
I
I'm
think
here
that your
for it.
work's really strong, and I want to like give you, an honest critique here. So I think I think that aspect of it is definitely improved. And I think treating it more like traditional is a good path towards getting that traditional look. But I one of the things I would say that you should do is you've got these lines that you kept like turning on and off. Like I say, like
Mhm.
leave the lines in. Like keep all of the like the production marks in longer. Keep the sketch layer on. Keep like all that additional context in there, and let it be messy during those early stages. Because like when I see you turning the lines on and off, it feels like it's in service of not having something in there that that it's not part of the final painting. Like in this case, you've drawn this face very nicely, and then you've axed it out. And it's like,
Yeah.
we're still in process here. Like, I don't think that there's a reason to like get rid of that. In traditional, like you wouldn't have the opportunity to like just flip your original pencil sketch off. I mean, what you would do
Right.
is, you would build up some washes over it and then eventually, paint over it in an opaque way that would like completely eliminate it. And I think that would work very well for you if you want to work in more traditional style, just to like leave those
Yeah.
construction lines in longer.
Yeah, I guess thinking about that then, because I'm so used to putting my lines on top. Like I come from more of like that comic book style originally,
Mm-hmm.
where it's very line art heavy. But I love the look of rendered pieces that you don't see line art, where um, my previous work has had we've talked about it, like pretty deep blacks, like it's like contrast is too high, the I'm not hanging out in the midtones enough, and I felt that contributes to it. So like, do you usually leave your line art on top? Do you just paint over it, keep it underneath? Like what
What
would
I
you say for that
typically
kind of
do is I can make a demonstration of it very quickly here. I have a layer. My pencil sketches usually come in where I've got my drawing in on a layer by itself, right?
Mhm.
And then I will do some early value work underneath it. And I'll do it in a fairly imprecise way because the goal is to try to like block in like the most broad values possible.
Yeah.
To just sort of figure out where like the lighting direction is, trying to figure out what the composition is. But I don't want to have to like worry about if I'm going to go back and forth on stuff, I don't want it to screw up and like paint over my lines and lose that context. Yeah. And then once I feel like I know where I'm going with it, my next step is to put a layer over the top and start continuing the process in a more refined way, but in a way that like works over the top of the lines. So then as I'm like building in additional refinement, it's starting, the lines just sort of naturally fade and fade and fade as like the work that I'm doing supersedes the line art. And so the line art naturally disappears as like a part of the process. But if I'm making a choice to make an opaque mark that like really defines where an edge is, like it'll blast out like a it'll blast out my lines like really quickly.
Yeah.
And if I am not certain about where a thing is going to go yet, then like my lines are still there and I still have like the context that comes with them. And over time, it will like progressively start to work its way over from being a sketch to a painting. And you're right. It is very different from the philosophy of something like a comic book where the ink work is something that is trying to be preserved. The original penciler and inker's work is something that like, the audiences want, that the creative people want to preserve. But
yeah, it's like a part of the process.
It's a part of the process and it's like an essential part of the overall look. But like, it's not something that I like manually have to like turn on and off. And in a lot of my paintings where I'm not overworking things. If you look closely and zoom in on some bits, you will find little swirly pencil marks that are faded out that are just barely poking through. And I think that is fine. I like don't go, oh my God, if anybody sees this, they're going to think I'm a bad painter. I better go and scrub all that out. Like some of it adds character. And like, when you go and like, if you were to go and like turn the line layer on and off on one of my paintings, you would probably see some of the pixels get a little lighter.
Yeah.
But like at this point, I can turn the line layer off, and you can still see where I'm going. But like the way I'm working, it doesn't require me to turn it off at any point.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like the rough value. Then you add color over the top of this, and then the lines start getting color. So if we had a gradient map on top of this, we're making the best art today. Then the darks of the pencil semi showing through start to gain some amount of color to them as well.
Yeah.
And then as the details start to go over the top, some of those darker colors might actually get sampled and like reused and refined and turned into stuff. And you can see how that all starts to become a part of the overall visual ecosystem.
For sure. I gotta try some of these brushes too. I just got them recently, so I'm gonna give them a spin, work them into my flow. I like the brushy look of this one in particular.
I use this. It's a Photoshop default square brush. It's just like a Photoshop default that I've changed the parameters on a little bit to be like to match like the pressure sensitivity of like the round brush the way I like it. And so this keeps me early on from like getting too precious about things. But yeah. All right. Any questions? Otherwise, I'm going to try to wrap this up. I'm 20 minutes late today.
It usually happens. I think we should just change this to an hour and a half from now.
Well, that's a good pivot. I mean, for anybody who's super interested, I had somebody reach out to me recently. They found my ancient mentorship application website on my old website. And they're like, are you still doing this? And I'm like, you know what? I haven't had a class in a while. Oh, we've still got Picot's promotion for Picot's course up on the front page. That's not on sale anymore. We got to swap that out, Dustin. But under the mentorships tab, I just started offering mine. It's the same terms that I had back 10 years ago when I first started doing mentorships. $600 a month. I usually work with people for about a 3-month span. If any of you either here live or on the YouTube want to work with me one-on-one, go over personal career goals, have me give you assignments every week, talk to you every week on a meeting together, one-on-one, private sessions, $600 a month. I've done these a lot. This is actually how I learned to teach. As I worked with a lot of people, helped a lot of people develop their portfolios, their careers. I've had some really awesome success stories over the years and something I'm very proud of. I like to do these kind of smaller, more intimate settings than doing big classes because I feel like I can make a bigger difference, much bigger difference than like somebody just following along at home. So if that's something that sounds really good to you. You can go to huckleberry.art/mentorships and check it out. We also have new mentorships with Neil Gray. You may know from the Discord here as Jazzmatazz. He started working with us. He opened up a couple of like small groups on Wednesday and Saturday. It's very exciting. His stuff he's gone from like having zero online presence to absolutely blowing up and going viral over and over again. He does like a very, very different style from me. And so he's got stuff up there too. And it's exciting. We're going to be promoting that more in the future. But thanks everyone for joining me today. I'm just going to go over the assignment again really quick. The assignment for this next week is this guy. Dropping him in the chat. It's also in the homework channel. I'm going to link to the homework channel just in case somebody here is having trouble finding it. Do a study of this piece. It seems like it should be really easy because there's like one color and one simple figure and like the lighting's not super complex, but oh boy, is there a lot of subtlety in this. There is something about that soft lighting, that subsurface scattering, the very artsy lighting on this that it makes this actually kind of an interesting challenge because it begs for every inch of it to be kind of rendered and defined. There is so much subtlety in the value and the way that the lighting is splashing across the face. The value range is kind of clamped and limited. We've got this very recognizable style to the face that you'll know when you're getting it wrong, and it's going to drive you absolutely crazy. This is a challenge of building the subtlety of the values, building the subtlety of the lighting, of the anatomy, and like that kind of super precise rendering is the sort of thing that I always get off on. There are so many little secondary splashes of light and extra little subtle curves and highlights, and you're going to have fun with this. This is like a treat. If I can find some time this week, instead of playing Deadlock, I will go ahead and do a study of this also, because this is a fun one. So I hope you guys like it. Thanks for joining me. It's great seeing you every week, and I'll be back next week at the same time. I'll see you around. The Deadlock addiction is real. It's very, very real right now. All right. Goodbye, guys.